In the blistering heat of a Montana summer morning, June 27, 1876, a column of exhausted U.S. soldiers crested the ridge overlooking the Little Bighorn River. What they saw wasn't a battlefield. It was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay twisted in the grass and scattered down into the ravines, stripped naked, hacked, and left to the sun. Horses shot out from under their riders. Bloated in the heat, the air reeked of blood and gunpowder and death. Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, the men who had survived their own desperate fight a few miles away, stared in stunned silence. This was supposed to be George Armstrong Custer's command, 210 battle-hardened troopers of the 7th Cavalry. Now they were gone, every last one. But it wasn't the number of dead that hit them hardest. It was the way they died. No glorious last stand on a hilltop with flags flying and sabers drawn. No heroic circle of defiance. Just panic, chaos, and bodies tumbled into gullies like discarded toys. The officers knew right then they were looking at something the nation could never accept. So they buried the truth along with the bodies. For more than a century, that truth stayed hidden. Until a freak wildfire in 1983 turned the grass away, and modern science dug up the single detail that changes everything. This is the story they tried to erase, and once you hear it, you'll never see. Custer's last stand, the same way again. Let's go back 3 days. June 25, 1876. The cavalry is pushing hard through the seas. Rolling hills of eastern Montana. Custer is chasing glory. Gold had been found in the Black Hills. The year before, land promised to the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho by treaty. The government wanted the tribes rounded up and onto reservations. Custer, the boy general of the Civil War, saw his ticket to bigger things. He split his regiment into 3 battalions. Reno would attack the southern end of the massive Indian village. Benteen would guard the pack train. And Custer? He'd take 200 men and swing north for the knockout blow. His scouts begged him not to. Bloody Knife, the half-Sioux guide who knew these plains better than anyone, rode beside Custer and pointed to the horizon. "You will find more Indians than you ever saw together," he warned. Another scout, half Yellowface, was blunter. "If you go in there, you will not come out alive." Custer laughed it off. The 7th Cavalry can whip any force of Indians. He had his orders, his ambition, and his reputation. He wasn't about to turn back. By midday, the village came into view, a sea of more than 1,000 lodges stretching for collars miles along the river. Nearly 2,000 warriors, Lakota under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, had gathered in a way no one had ever seen before. They weren't running. They were waiting. Reno hit the southern edge first. His men charged, guns blazing, but the village was huge and the resistance ferocious. Within minutes, Reno was forced to retreat to a bluff and dig in. Benteen, hearing the gunfire, joined him. Together, they held off wave after wave of attackers for hours. But Custer? He was nowhere to be seen. He had taken his 200 troopers and ridden straight into the heart of it. What happened? Next unfolded faster than anyone expected. The warriors didn't wait to be attacked. They swarmed. From ravines and ridges, from behind every hillock, they poured fire into Custer's column. Repeating rifles, Henrys, Winchesters, cracked in a deadly rhythm. The soldiers' single-shot Springfield carbines couldn't match. Horses screamed and went down. Men were cut off from each other in the smoke and dust. Red Horse, a Minneconjou Lakota warrior who fought that day, later described it in his own. "These soldiers became foolish," he said. "Many threw away their guns and raised their penday hands, saying, 'Sioux, pity us, take us prisoners.' The Sioux did not take a single soldier prisoner, but killed all of them." Another warrior remembered it like hunting buffalo. "We swirled around them like water circling a stone." In less than an hour, some accounts say 45 minutes, Custer's entire command was gone. The soldiers didn't die in one heroic knot on Last Stand Hill. Forensic evidence would later prove they broke into small groups, fighting desperately as they tried to reach the river for water or break out. Some ended up in deep ravines, backs against the earth, firing wildly until the ammunition ran out. Others were overrun in the open. The warriors moved among the fallen, collecting guns, cartridges, even uniforms. By nightfall, the only sound was the victory songs, drifting across the valley. 2 days later, when the relief column finally arrived, the scene was worse than anything the survivors could have imagined. Lieutenant Edward Godfrey later wrote that the bodies had been stripped and mutilated in ways so horrible the details were withheld from the public for 20 found years. Skulls crushed by war clubs, arrows still protruding from chests and limbs. One trooper was found with more than 20 arrows in him, arms and legs hacked off, faces unrecognizable. The men weren't just killed, they were desecrated. Custer himself lay near the top of the ridge, 2 bullet wounds, one to the left temple, one near the heart. He was naked, except for his socks. His body had been spared the worst of the set. Mutilation. Some Cheyenne women who knew him from earlier encounters made sure of that, but even he wasn't untouched. The legend of him standing tall with a pistol in each hand, surrounded by his dead men in a perfect circle, pure fiction. He was found sitting against a horse, head slumped, no dramatic pose, no last defiant gesture, just another corpse among the 268. The burial parties worked in stunned silence. They dug shallow graves, marked them with what they could, and tried to make sense of it. But back east, the newspapers were already spinning. Custer's last stand, a heroic sacrifice, a noble defeat. The public needed heroes, not embarrassment. The Army had just suffered its worst loss against Native forces in history, and it happened right when the country was celebrating its centennial. That's when the real cover-up began. Not some shadowy government conspiracy with hidden files, but something more personal and powerful. Elizabeth Bacon Custer Libby refused to let her husband be remembered as a reckless fool who led his men to slaughter. For the next 50 years, she waged a one-woman campaign. Books, lectures, interviews. She painted George as the perfect soldier, the devoted husband, the victim of jealous superiors and overwhelming odds. She turned a military disaster into an American legend. Paintings showed him standing tall, saber-raised, surrounded by loyal men, fighting to the last. Songs and poems followed. The myth took hold so completely that even the battlefield markers were placed according to the legend, not the facts. The single detail that would eventually shatter that myth stayed buried under thick prairie grass for more than a century. Then, on August 19, 1983, a careless cigarette tossed from a passing car started a wildfire. Flames roared across the battlefield, burning away decades of overgrowth. For the first time since 1876, the ground was naked. Archaeologist Douglas Scott and his team saw an opportunity no one had ever had. They walked the ridges and ravines with metal detectors, GPS units, and forensic tools that would have seemed like magic to the men who fought there. What they found didn't just rewrite the battle, it exposed the lie. Thousands of cartridge cases and bullets told the real story. The soldiers' Springfield cases were scattered in small, desperate clusters down the slopes and into the ravines, not in one neat defensive line on the hill. The Indians' 4.4 caliber repeating rifle cases formed wide arcs, surrounding those positions, pouring fire from every direction. One warrior position alone had cases showing at least 61 different lever-action guns. The troopers had been outgunned and outmaneuvered from the start. The bone fragments and equipment told an even darker tale. Men had died where they fell, trying to escape, not where the myth said they stood their ground. No evidence of mass suicide. No final defiant stand, just a rapid, terrifying collapse into panic. The last stand wasn't a stand at all. It was a rout. Scott and his colleagues mapped every artifact with scientific precision. They could literally follow individual guns across the battlefield by the unique marks left on the cartridge cases. One soldier's carbine had been captured early and turned against his comrades. The data painted a picture of pure disorder. Officers lost control. Units were cut off. Horses stampeded. In the end, it wasn't bravery that defined the fight. It was fear. And that single detail, the precise location of those cartridge cases in the ravines, changed everything. It proved the accepted narrative was wrong. The heroic paintings, the school books, the movies, all built on a foundation of wishful thinking and deliberate myth-making. The Army had known the truth within days. The burial reports described the scattered dead and the mutilations in grim detail, but admitting Custer's blunders, dividing his force, ignoring scouts. Charging a village he didn't understand would have been too humiliating, so they let Libby. Custer turned failure into folklore. The gruesome secret they tried to hide wasn't just the mutilations, though those were horrific enough. It was the fear, the panic, the realization in those final minutes that there was no escape, no glory, only the sound of thousands of warriors closing in. One trooper was found with a pocket comb and a 5-cent piece still in his pocket, simple things that made him human. Another had his skull smashed so flat it looked like a pancake. These weren't faceless soldiers in a painting. They were young men, average, age 22, who died terrified because one man's vanity outweighed every warning. Today, when you stand on Last Stand Hill, the marble markers still dot the ridge. But if you look down into the ravines, you understand, the real battle happened there, in the low ground, where the grass once hid the evidence. The warriors didn't need to storm a heroic position. They simply surrounded pockets of desperate men and ended it. The discovery, after Custer's last stand, didn't just shock the nation in 1876. It shocked the archaeologists 100 years later. And the truth they uncovered is still uncomfortable. It forces us to look past the romance of the Old West and see the raw, brutal reality of conquest and resistance. No glory, no last defiant stand. Just 210 men who rode into history and never rode out. And for over a century, powerful voices tried to hide that fact behind paintings and poems and patriotic myths. But fire and science finally stripped it bare. What they discovered after Custer's last stand wasn't just bodies. It was the truth. And once you know it, it haunts you. Because legends die hard, but the evidence never lies. This is the story America tried to forget. Now you know why.